In this video, I'm going to share my experience, no frills, successes, failures, and everything in between with JADAM Organic Farming. And if you've never heard of JADAM Organic Farming, we'll get into it in this video. But I want to just say for now that JADAM is a type of agriculture that uses DIY inputs to minimize costs on a farm or a garden, and that prioritizes the use of indigenous microorganisms in several of its 5 core inputs. And so in this video, I'm going to cover what has worked for me, what I have particularly appreciated, what has helped me learn, and what I think is definitely worth trying for you, especially if you are trying to take a more natural approach to gardening or small-scale farming. I'll also talk through my honest take on a few of the processes that haven't worked super well for me yet, and where I think some of the systems and processes might fall short. Again, this is a personal review. I'll go a bit more in depth as always, because I know that you guys and gals appreciate that. So back in 2020, we had just moved into our first house and the pandemic hit, which meant that we had a lot of time on our hands. All of a sudden, specifically at home. Didn't have kids yet, had a pretty good sized backyard, so Cassidy and I started to try to learn how to garden. So like anyone would, I opened up YouTube and got to searching very quickly, and I came across a YouTuber, Cornett, who has an incredible channel called Nature's Always Right. And in one of his first videos, I saw his recommendation of the original JADAM Organic Farming book by Youngsang Cho. Didn't really know what JADAM was all about, but I put the book in my Amazon wish list, and it sat there for 6 months or so until my mom bought it for me for my birthday. And by that point, I had pretty much forgotten about it. I remember opening it up and being like, oh yeah, thank you. And she kind of had to remind me that it was on my wish list. I took it home, opened it up, learned about JMS, which is one of the best, if not the best things about JADAM. And you can check out our recent video breakdown of JMS here. But after that, the book just hung out on the shelf for a bit. Like maybe until the next season. And then I finally cracked it open and just read it, really tried to absorb it completely. And I'll say right away that the concepts and the recipes were very compelling to me. But something that I didn't expect was how reading it would shift my whole view on gardening and even agriculture on the whole. The book is written to farmers, and I was applying it to my home garden scale, but it helped inspire me to think about growing food and flowers as a partnership with nature. And I know that that sounds very fluffy and maybe unrealistic to some people. But the truth is, I came to learn from this book that nature is crazy complex. And as growers of plants and animals, we're really trying to simplify something that contains infinite complexity. And so by tapping into the natural processes and allowing the microbes to do the work, it's kind of a hack. You really release yourself from a lot of the burdens that if you can get the natural processes that occur naturally in nature into your garden naturally. And so we'll get into more specifics about how that looks like for each of the techniques and frameworks. One more thing about the book, and you'll know if you have tried to read the book in English, is that it's not quite the smoothest translation, which is really unfortunate in my opinion, because I can see how this might invalidate Youngsang Cho's credibility to a lot of Westerners. I generally have an open mind. Sometimes that gets me in trouble, but it also means that I'm pretty open to trying new things. And if you have only gardened conventionally using store-bought fertilizers, tilling or digging up your garden every year and all of that, the JADAM frameworks are going to be pretty out there for you. If you are into permaculture or no-till farming stuff already, you're probably going to have an easier time getting on board with all of this and actually implementing it quickly. Overall, because the book is a little hard to understand, I want to give big caveat that I am going to do my best to represent the ideas and the concepts accurately, but it won't be perfect. And the best way to learn about these concepts for yourself is going to be to actually just get the book. You can buy it on Amazon, and we have the link for you if you want to use that. I've organized this review into a few main sections. What is JADAM, the philosophies and the key principles, and then I'll provide technical breakdowns of each of the recipes, each of which we have more advanced and thorough recipe videos that we will link to, so you can check those out if you want to learn more. We will end with my honest thoughts on JADAM and the different components within, and by the end of the video, you should have a pretty good sense of the different components, how they work, how they function, within the broader system of JADAM, and generally how to make the inputs. Finally, we'll wrap up with some general pros and cons and my advice on whether or not you might want to pursue this style of gardening and or farming. You can use the timestamps to navigate with ease, or you can watch all the way through to the end. Either way, thank you for watching. So what is JADAM? Well, in the 1950s and 60s, a Korean farmer named Youngsang Cho researched, innovated, and invented a framework of agriculture now called Korean natural farming. Decades later, Youngsang Cho was inspired to simplify and advance the principles from KNF by retaining the usage of indigenous microbes and trimming the excess pieces. JADAM is a Korean word or phrase that means people who are like nature. Within this framework, rather than utilize 9 core inputs with varying application schedules, Youngsang Cho mostly broke things up into a few main categories of inputs: the microbial solution, the fertilizer, and the pesticide. And there's a bit more to it than that, which we'll get into, but I get the sense that the reason he went for a more streamlined and straightforward approach is because he found that it was hard for farmers to integrate KNF principles and inputs into their seasonal routine. So he took the approach of doing one-for-one replacements rather than spraying synthetic fertilizers. Make this super low cost, easy to make homemade fertilizer instead. Rather than spraying harsh chemical pesticides, slot in these inputs instead that aren't harmful to the soil biology and don't kill wildlife. Cho also includes a lot of personal philosophy throughout the book, and honestly, I don't want to misrepresent him, so I won't go over all of that, but he personally has a very integrated take on his farming techniques and the philosophy for his life. Part 1 in the book is called Bringing Hope with Ultra Low Cost Agriculture, and that is the base level of what Cho is trying to do with JADAM. He's trying to bring hope to growers. He mentions that farmers are undervalued members of society, often suffocated by debt, living with depression that often leads to suicide. And I don't actually know if this is the case mostly for Korean farmers or if it applies to others across the world. But Cho sees it as a part of his mission to restore honor and dignity to growers along with the land that they grow on, which is a really inspiring mission. The 4 aims for JADAM technology are simple, easy, scientific, and effective, or SESE. He says JADAM has strived to create a system based on SESE because we believe that only when the farming method has achieved SESE, only then farmers will embrace it voluntarily and grow into significant numbers. We could achieve SESE because the foundation was laid down by the pioneers of organic farming, and the knowledge was shared by many organic growers that supported JADAM. SESE holds the key to high quality and high yield. So in this section of the book, Cho talks through challenges facing agriculture, the future of agriculture, how to transition from conventional to organic, and some of the history of natural farming in Korea. In part 2, Cho offers his philosophy and principles, and this is where things start to get a little bit controversial, and truthfully, I haven't fully landed the plane on some of this personally. The main principle of JADAM is to do as nature does, which is great. Practically speaking, Cho says that this means that he doesn't recommend crop rotation, removal of crop residue, and conventional fertilizer application schedules. He also avoids discriminating against anaerobic bacteria in favor of only aerobic bacteria. Now, these are some bold claims, and I'm sure that some of you watching are going to struggle to get on board with this. That's okay. Just hang on and I will do my best to explain the rationale. Starting with the first set of values. So no crop rotation. Cho suggests that if you look at nature, you will never see plants rotating themselves season over season. The fear and legitimate concern regarding monocrop agriculture is that, number 1, you will steadily deplete the nutrients that plant requires in order to grow and thereby create nutrient imbalance in the soil. And 2, plants in a monoculture will become more susceptible to disease, as a strand of fungi or bacteria can wipe out an entire crop, given it's the variety that is susceptible. Cho's response to this is that the reason soil nutrients are depleted in farming operations is because crop residues are removed and discarded, sometimes even burned as waste material. In nature, plants are constantly self-mulching, re-imparting nutrients back to the soil that they will then be able to utilize later on for sustenance. Cho's response to the fear of disease is that our fears are overblown. All sorts of diseases and pathogenic fungi live in the soil at all times. The key is not to try to remove them, but in crowding them out with beneficial biology. The same applies to human cleanliness, by the way. The example that I often give people is if your kids were growing up and started hanging out with friends that were a bad influence on them, the solution would not be to remove them from all social interactions with everyone. A better approach might be to encourage them to hang out with the right crowd. Adopt a more supportive friend group so that the poor friend group loses influence. If you sanitize your hands constantly and take antibiotics for every single illness or infection, you're kind of wiping the slate clean, which leaves the door open for pathogens to thrive. A better approach might be to incorporate beneficial probiotics into your diet and skincare. Obviously, do not take this as medical advice. I'm not a doctor, but I use this example as how we can view plant cultivation and soil health from the JADAM framework. Again, I'll mention that Cho is speaking largely to farmers who are already growing single crops as their produce. For those growers, he says it's a bit unrealistic to suggest that they should just diversify their crops. Instead, what they can do is utilize their crop residue as a way to rebalance soil nutrients and feed biology. And we'll get into this a little bit more later. The second main principle in JADAM is to not value aerobic microbes over anaerobic microbes. And this one flies in the face of nearly all modern organic gardening wisdom. But it was a pretty significant unlock for me once I learned about Cho's perspective. His response to the fear of foul-smelling, putrefied anaerobic soils is that in nature, putrefaction plays a critical role in initiating and maintaining balance in the ecosystem. For this, he goes through a lengthy history lesson spanning back thousands of years ago to records of Chinese farmers and ancient books written about agricultural practices all the way to the present day. And essentially, he calls out the so-called organic farming founders, Albert Howard, Rudolf Steiner, and J.I. Rodale, by saying so many generations of farmers before them farmed organically, and now we're just going to pretend that they don't exist. Cho's suggestion for why agricultural history has been erased and ignored is because for millennia, farmers weren't sold products, they made their own. And these were not only the photosynthetic microbes that convert sunlight into carbon that produces independent nutrients, it was the anaerobic decomposers as well. If you dig down into the soil, you will find both aerobic and anaerobic microbes, and each have a unique role and function in crop cultivation. Again, this is a simplified explanation. Check out the book to learn more about why Cho thinks this to be the case, and the capitalist powers that be that don't want you to know that you don't need their products. To start out a new growing space, JADAM style, Cho supplies two approaches, one of which is used for starting garden beds with trellises, and the other is just setting up beds for transplants. Either way, he recommends using a lightweight tiller to break up the soil initially, never to be tilled again, and then compost is used to top dress the soil. Then you cover it up with a high quality landscape fabric and start growing your crops. Pretty straightforward technique that a lot of organic or no-till growers already are using. The real differences with JADAM start coming out in part 4 of the book, Principles of Making Organic Farming Inputs. And this is where Cho expands a bit on the importance of anaerobic ferments. He also dives into the usage of simplifying inputs from Korean natural farming down to just relying on water and leaf mold soil, and he writes at length about the importance of relying on ambient temperatures for your garden ferments, rather than external heat sources. He discusses psychrophiles, mesophiles, and thermophiles within the world of microbiology, and honestly, it's a bit rambly. I think he could have summarized by just saying that you can let ambient temperatures facilitate fermentation for optimal microbial diversity. The most important thing that he discusses in this section, in my opinion, is leaf mold soil. And if you've watched any of our other videos before, you know what this refers to. I'm talking about the soil beneath the leaf litter of an undisturbed forest. This stuff is teeming with microbes, good stuff that has accumulated hopefully for centuries. If you're collecting it from a good spot, collect from a diverse number of places, different elevations, and most of all, look for that sweet mycelium. These are the white strands of fungi that hold together clods of soil and leaf debris. This indicates health and fertility, and most of all, a lack of disturbance until you come along. of course, which let me encourage you to just do your best to cover up the bare soil that you disturbed after collecting leaf litter so that you don't disrupt nature too much. So collect a couple gallons of leaf mold soil for the season if you're growing on a backyard garden. If you're growing on acreage, you probably want to scoop up a garbage bag full of this stuff just so you have it for the season. Keep it in a cool, dark place and it'll last you the year. The microbes won't die unless you bake them. And with that out of the way, finally, after a long run-up, we arrive to part 5 of JADAM, making organic farming inputs. And this is where the book starts exploring the core inputs that are used in the system. The first input is for a natural mineral water. And this is one that we haven't used in recent years. I'll be honest, we did use it quite a bit when we first were getting started. Honestly, we might have to get back into it because it's so easy to make. You basically just collect rocks from your area, put them in a container and fill it up with water. Then hang a fine mesh bag with leaf mold soil in it and let the microbes break down contaminants in the water. Cho says that this is a way to purify water using leaf mold soil. He says it takes only about 2 to 3 days and then the water will be excellent quality and you can use it to irrigate, make JMS, make JLF, all the inputs that we'll get into in a bit. But at this point in the book, I want to point out something cool about Cho's work here because as you read through the book, you get these little snapshots of his own farm operations and how he's constructed systems that could scale up or down for farms. And he gives some nice overviews through pictures in the book, but then also provides more extensive walkthroughs on his website, which we'll link to in the description if you want to check out his videos there. But the point is, you can really tell that Cho is determined to contextualize his approach to actual farmers. He's trying to make it feel doable. He shows off his irrigation system, his electrical power distribution board, and even a DIY water softener that you can make for a relatively affordable price. Obviously, prices will vary with access to materials and whatnot. The second recipe of the JADAM framework is JADAM microorganism solution, the microbial solution, or simply JMS. And this is the backbone of the whole thing, honestly. If you choose to do one thing, I'd recommend learning how to make JMS because it's powerful. We just released a full tutorial on the whole process of making it, so you can check that out. But I'll give you an overview for this video. Fill a container with dechlorinated water, and then using a fine mesh bag of some kind, I like paint strainers because they're cheap, filter through some leaf mold soil, unrefined sea salt, and a food source. Now for the food source, the most common ingredient is going to be cooked potato. I used potato for years and have recently kind of switched over to mixed grains and brown rice for a slightly more diversified brew. Basically, you're going to strain these ingredients through the fine mesh bag into the water and let the microbes feed on the carbohydrates in the water. After a few days, you'll see bubbles form on the surface of the water, and this indicates microbial activity. Once the foam has reached its peak, it's ready to be applied to your soil or whatever you would like to use it for. I use JMS to water my chicken coop bedding, to wash my IMO boxes, as a microbial boost for finished compost, and of course, as a soil drench and plant foliar spray. Just make sure that when you use it on your plants, you follow the recommended dilution rates, which are typically 1 parts JMS, 10 parts water. So that's like 2 cups of JMS in a 2-gallon watering can, or 200 milliliters for a 2-liter watering can. That seems like good math. Spray this on your plants with your sprayers, water it into the soil that your plants are growing in. Soak your seedlings in it before transplanting them. For seedlings, it's probably a good idea to tone it down to 1 to 100 dilution rate. Of course, if you like to live on the edge, you just do whatever you want. JMS is most effective applied once or twice a week. No need to go every day. Even a few times a month is great. If you want to store your JMS, you can water it into some oats, rice, or wheat bran and let it inoculate the substrate. I go in greater depth on how to do this in our complete guide to JMS, so check that out if you want to learn how I did it. And with that, let's move on to recipe number 3, JADAM liquid fertilizer. Now, once again, check out our full mini course if you want to get the big picture and the nitty-gritty of JLF. The main thing that I want to say about this really easy fertilizer is that, number 1, the process to make it is crazy simple. Number 2, Youngsang Cho gives a full nutrient quality breakdown of multiple JLFs. So for those of you who might doubt that it has anything of substance, Cho really has done the work to prove its legitimacy. And finally, 3, I think the word fertilizer is actually a bit misleading, because in all honesty, the amount of nutrients these liquid inputs are supplying to plants are very minimal and should not be considered a replacement for store-bought synthetic or organic fertilizer, with the expectation that they will get you the exact same result in the first season. Instead, what I would suggest is that these so-called fertilizers are more accurately biomimickers. The primary function of the fertilizers is inherent in the way they're made. To make a JLF, you take plant debris, put it in a container, add some leaf mold soil, and cover it with water so that it is just barely covering the plant debris. Then let it ferment for a few weeks or even a few years, and you've got some seriously stanky sludge. What is this seriously stanky sludge? Well, as the microbes from the leaf mold soil are eating up their food source, the plant material that you added to the container, something is happening. Actually, lots of things are happening, and honestly, I am not a scientist, and so I'm really not the best person to describe this process. But in essence, the microbes are consuming a food source and then adapting and multiplying accordingly. Microbes have a reproductive and evolutionary rapidity that is a little hard to keep track of. Simply put, microbes adjust and fine-tune based on the food source that they are given. So when you feed microbes from leaf mold soil tomato crop residue, say, you're giving them the opportunity to evolve and adapt to that food source so that they can better digest and process those nutrients, breaking the tomatoes down into their base nutrient form. So what happens when you introduce those microbes to your tomato plants? Well, after having adapted the biology inherent to tomato plants, these microbes are perfectly suited to facilitate nutrient breakdown and delivery of that suite of tomato plant needs. Of course, there are nutrients in the solution that also are beneficial to tomato plants, but these nutrients wouldn't mean much without help from the microbes who exchange those nutrients for plant root exudates. The theory expands to all crops. Customizable JLFs can be made from the crop residue of the crop you wish to fertilize. All-purpose, broad-spectrum JLFs can be made from grass, purslane, and other weeds as a food source for the leaf mold soil microbes. We've got a general breakdown on our free downloadable PDF linked in the description, but for diluting these JLFs, it matters how long the fertilizer has been fermenting. For a week to a month, you're looking at a 1 to 10 dilution. For 1 to 6 months, a 1 to 100 dilution. And for brews greater than 6 months, I recommend scaling it way back and just playing it safe with a ratio of 1 to 1,000 dilution rate. Now, beyond just the obvious customizable fertilizers and the all-purpose JLFs, Cho supplies approximate nutrient breakdowns for several other JLFs, including fertilizers made out of food waste, urine and poo, fish meal, anchovies, perilla pulp, which I'm going to guess is a crop residue common in Korea, as well as oyster shell, crab shell, humus, phyllite, and kelp, all of which can serve unique functions in the garden. Kelp JLF is used as a natural color enhancer, might be relevant for flower growers. Oyster shell and animal bone JLF is used as a calcium supplement, and I should say that for these animal product JLFs and the human urine and feces JLFs, the fermentation time does drastically increase to a minimum of 3 to 6 months. Dilution rates also change for these because you typically don't need as much, so don't go crazy here until you get a sense of how they work. Check out the book if you are interested in getting, again, into the nitty-gritty on these. And I would love to hear your comments if you have personally jumped into any of these advanced JLFs. Overall, one of the main points that Cho makes in his book is that you should always apply JMS when you apply JLF. And it's not necessary the other way around, but Cho also supplies a lot of application schedules and soil fertility programs. If you want a simple calculator, I made one that you can access. It's just a Google Sheets calculator. Just plug in your square footage and it will tell you approximately how much you need and a general application schedule. In the book, Cho provides fertilizer programs for soil foundation building, for when plant growth is weak, when flowering and fruiting is weak, when fruit growth is weak. And I'll say fans of Korean natural farming will recognize these protocols as they mirror some of the nutritive cycle theory of supplying different plant nutrients at different stages of a plant's growth cycle. If you want to learn more about that, you can check out our Home Gardener's Guide to KNF video. At the very end of this part 5 in the book, Cho gives a summary of the function of each element, which is a cool point of reference, and it shows the knowledge of chemistry that Cho has, and I'm pretty sure that he has a degree in chemistry. I couldn't find it in the book, but I think I remember him actually mentioning that. And if so, it shows. Part 6 of the JADAM book is devoted entirely to natural pesticides, and this is where we wade into territory that starts to feel a bit less natural, definitely agricultural, which is totally fine. The point of this book is to be natural and agricultural. But just be warned, whereas JMS and JLF are relatively simple and low risk, as we explore the natural pesticides, you are going to need to put your chemist pants on. There are 4 main components of JADAM natural pesticide: JADAM microbial solution, JADAM herbal solution, JADAM wetting agent, and JADAM sulfur, all of which are made using soft water. Now, if you want an expanded and updated version of all of the JADAM natural control framework, you can also check out Cho's other book, JADAM Organic Pest and Disease Control, subtitle Powerful DIY Solutions to 167 Common Garden Pests and Diseases. This book provides detailed and creepy pictures of a ton of different pests that you might encounter, along with his specific recommended spraying protocols for controlling pests during the winter and when you're facing infestation and when you're in emergency mode. In the OG JADAM book, you essentially get an abridged version of this. This section starts out with Cho bringing up a conundrum for organic growers. And that conundrum is, if we're truly looking at how nature does things, we have to accept the fact that most fruits in the wild develop fruit precisely so that birds, along with insects and other animals, will carry their seeds away in the fruit. And this means that plants and animals have co-evolved to rely on each other. Therefore, for most plants, especially plants humans grow to eat, we can expect animals to want to eat them. That means farmers have a choice. They can choose to grow crops for wildlife in their area, or they can protect their crops so that they can sell them and keep their livelihood. One response to this has been to develop chemical pesticides that have no regard for human, plant, or soil health. While effective in protecting crops, the side effects and harm caused to the environment is substantial enough to warrant concern. Therefore, Cho developed an adaptable natural pesticide made out of chemicals that biodegrade within 5 days in the soil, and which cause no long-term harm to the environment or human health. Now, to develop these inputs, Cho did extensive research spanning years, maybe decades of experimentation, trial and error, adjusting dilution rates, etc. And he includes a lot of his journey in the book. So again, if you want to hear about how he came to discover a lot of these things, you can read all about it. And at the same time, the core inputs within JADAM natural pesticide are pretty simple and basically require you to use a very clean version of what other organic pesticides use to deter pests. Starting with the JADAM wetting agent, or JWA, we're basically making a Castile soap here. It's got 3 ingredients, super simple, but it does require a bit of care and attention to detail, unlike JMS and JLF that are more loosey-goosey. Check out our video on making JWA to get all the specifics down, but for the overview, you're basically mixing oil, lye, and water together to create a chemical reaction that heats up and emulsifies, once blended, into a surfactant. And this takes a few days to make. You want to protect your skin against splashing when the liquid is crazy hot, and otherwise the JADAM wetting agent is fairly simple to make. The one key point that Cho makes sure that you are aware of, and this is key for every piece of the J and P puzzle, you got to use soft water. Soft water is the key to the wetting agent spreading out and sticking to the plant leaves and the fruits effectively. The next piece of the J and P puzzle is JADAM sulfur. And once again, this isn't really so much a brand new invention by Cho, it's sulfur. But the method that he demonstrates for making it is one that requires no heating equipment, only the ingredients and a bucket with a stirring stick. You can check out our video on JADAM sulfur for the specific amounts of ingredients and all that, but I'll say that this is one of the trickiest JADAM inputs to make, in my opinion. It took us a couple times to fully figure out how to get the sulfur to melt through the chemical reaction because it requires a very hot temperature to do so. And we're trying to do it out in cold weather outdoors with a smaller amount. That said, we figured it out, got the sulfur to melt and dissolve in the water, In a second, we'll get to its uses for this input, but the last new thing Cho has as part of the JNP suite is the JADAM herbal solution. Again, nothing crazy innovative here from my perspective. We're basically just boiling herbs in water to extract compounds and scents that are off-putting to pests. What is novel is the work that Cho did to find hundreds of different herbs that you can use to make the JADAM herbal solution. And the main three that he recommends in his book are Jerusalem artichoke, ginkgo, berries, and bracken. But he also mentions balsam, foxglove, tobacco, red spiderfly, monk's hood, oleander, sephora root, garlic, Korean passiflower root, hot peppers, peppermint, and pyracantha. These are all solid options for JHS. For our herbal solutions, we've just used Jerusalem artichoke so far. Now, the final component of the JADAM natural pesticide protocol is JMS. JMS, Cho explains, has been shown to act as a mild natural pest deterrent as well as a highly effective preventative fungicide inhibitor. The key to remember for JMS is that when it's used in a natural pesticide spray is that you need to use soft water to make the JMS, otherwise the wetting agent won't be as effective as spreading out across and clinging to the plant foliage that you're spraying it onto. Now that you've got all of your natural pesticides components, we've got to make sure that you use them correctly. So first I'll remind you of the basic function of each ingredient. First, the JADAM wetting agent acts as a surfactant that binds the other ingredients together and helps disperse them evenly across plant leaves and stems. It also serves as a mild pest deterrent. JADAM microbial solution acts as a preventative fungicide or germicide by applying beneficial microbes to the plant foliage in order to crowd out and dominate pathogenic microbes. JADAM sulfur, on the other hand, is used as more of a reactive measure, although you can use it preventatively, against plant disease. The pathogenic microbes struggle to metabolize the sulfur, whereas the beneficial microbes are more able to process it and even utilize it for plant nutrient uptake. Turns out sulfur is an essential nutrient for plants. The main takeaway from these two inputs, the JMS and the JS, is that they are not compatible together according to Cho. He recommends using only one at a time because the sulfur can make the microbial solution go wonky. So the way that I see it, if you've got a disease outbreak, treat it with sulfur. If you're just doing your maintenance, upkeep, spraying, stick to your JMS. And the final ingredient in JADAM natural pesticide is the herbal solution. And the goal with this one, as a reminder, is to deliver a plant compound that is unpleasant for insects to walk across or ingest, thus deterring them away from nom-nomming on your plants. And believe it or not, that completes the inputs found in this book so far, as I am aware. That was a lot to cover, but now I'd like to get into my personal experience, and I've already hinted at this a bit earlier on in this video, but I'll break things up into what I love about JADAM, what I'm still testing, and what has not worked yet for me. So first of all, no big surprise, my favorite thing about JADAM is the microorganism solution. I think that this is a super easy and effective way to introduce indigenous microbes into your garden, especially if you are just getting started with this way of gardening. We use this quite often and will continue to make it. It's just so easy and simple for a great return on your investment. For what I'm still testing, I'm actually going to just lump that into actually what has not worked yet for me, because to be honest, I don't know if I've really given it a completely fair shot. This season, we have experienced unprecedented pest pressure in the garden, and the JADAM natural pesticide routine has done little to help mitigate the damage. This is, of course, a huge bummer, but I will say that we are continuing to experiment and trying to replant often, even when pests are taking out our crops within hours of being planted. This isn't all of our crops, of course, but it has been a pretty tough start to the season. That said, with such intense pest pressure, it's legitimately hard to know if this is a normal environment for the JADAM natural pesticide to be able to work in. I guess I would also say that I really wish that it did work as well as Cho has found it to work, as well as many others I know have used it to great effect. So we will continue to mess around with dilution rates. I just reread in preparation for this video that Cho recommends decreasing dilution rates of the herbal solution, which means adding more per gallon. So we will be experimenting with that. But yeah, sadly, can't say that we have really experienced huge success yet with the JNPs. And finally, we'll wrap things up with my general thoughts on who this type of gardening is for, because I think that there are specific demographics, certain people, you guys, viewers, who are really going to benefit from JADAM, and others that would actually be better off not bothering with it. So starting there, from my point of view, if you are growing plants on less than 20 square feet, I would not bother recommending with JADAM. Patio gardens or single raised bed operations are just not going to be worth it to go through the trouble to buy the startup equipment and take the time to make the inputs. I'd just keep it simple. If you are a home gardener who does not already rely on synthetic plant foods and store-bought inputs for your garden and everything is growing just fine, then yeah, why change anything? I would also say then that it might not be worth it for you to dive into JADAM. Now, if you are a soil nerd and you want to see if your garden can do better, of course, give JMS a try and see how your plants respond. Maybe you'll be surprised. As far as those who I want to recommend JADAM to, I would say that anyone growing a good amount of plants, either for harvest or for aesthetic, JADAM is fairly simple, straightforward, and a helpful way to introduce fertility into your garden for minimal cost. For the price of a couple buckets and a few paint strainers, you're pretty much set up to make JMS and JLF, and that might be all you need. I'll say that if you are a farmer or growing a ton of food for a very productive homestead, it might be worth trying out the JADAM natural pesticide inputs, especially if you're currently using pesticides or fungicides for your plants. The recipes make a lot of the ingredient, so you'll have them for a while. When you spread out the cost of ingredients over time, you're really spending very little on pest and disease control at all when you go the JADAM route. I would also actually say that I think the JADAM offers a huge amount of hope and promise for small and larger scale farmers. It's already really taken off in Korea and has something like 50,000 farmers in Korea alone using its techniques. So yeah, I'd say Cho is onto something. We plan on keeping JADAM at the forefront of what we're doing to build healthy soil wherever we grow, and we'll definitely be using it in the future when we start our first farm. And that concludes a very long video for this channel. Thank you for sticking with us to the end. If you made it this far, super grateful to you. Please check out our other videos, more in-depth tutorials on these JADAM inputs. Check out our free resources, of course, linked in the description. And as always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.